issue of shares. Under this topic, we will now study about private placement of shares. Private placement. Private placement means selling its securities privately to a selected group of investors. So this number does not exceed 200 people. And so private placement means wherein a public limited company sells its securities to privately. Investors usually includes friends, exclusive investors, and institutional investors. For example, it might be only to a certain set of people, that is to a certain members of a company. These securities are not issued to the general public since it is given only to a certain set of people. It is an alternative to IPO, to a company seeking to raise capital for expansion. So, wherein IPO shares are offered to the general public. So, instead of it, it will be offered to a certain set of people. Now, this can be applicable and can be useful when the company is quite established and it does not want to go into the procedure of issuing shares to the general public. And so when a company is having enough of goodwill or it is a reputed company, such private placement can be very much useful for acquiring capital. It has less regulatory requirements, reduced cost and time, since there is no concept of advertisement or there is no concept wherein it has to be informed to the general public. And so this method is usually utilized, wherein there is a lot of less regulatory requirements and there is also reduction of cost and time. The companies offer securities only to a known people of the company. Company issues a letter of offer to these investors. So here the company is offering to them, that is the company informs those investors about the type of securities that is going to be issued to them. Shares offered may be fully paid or partly paid, and the amount to be paid by the investor should be by check, demand draft or electronic transfer but not in cash. So these shares can be fully paid or partly paid depending on the investment, depending on the amount of capital that is going to be required. The right to renounce, that is, to give away the rights of investment, is not allowed to the applicants. The existing shareholders have to approve it in the general meetings by passing a special resolution. A company makes private placement in two ways, that is, right issue. So, right issue means wherein the existing equity shareholders are allowed to invest in the new shares of the company. And so, right issue is a facility that is going to be given to the existing equity shareholders. And so, these shareholders will purchase the shares proportionately. That is, the company offers the shares as per the already existing shares that is held by them. The method, that is preferential allotment. So preferential allotment means wherein a company is going to issue specific securities to a select group of people. So it is known as preferential allotment. These shares can be equity shares or shares that are later converted into equity shares. These shares are offered to promoters, existing shareholders, or even organizations. And so it is usually offered so that these shareholders later on become also the owners of the company, or they can be given these shares which are later going to be converted into equity shares. The fully paid shares are offered to the applicants. The payment for these shares has to be in cash. These shares have no voting rights, that is, they cannot vote or they cannot participate in the general meetings of the company. the shareholders have to pass a special resolution. So here we can take up the example of preference shares, wherein convertible preference shares, wherein these shares can be converted later into equity shares. And so these shares are offered to them at a predetermined price, and later on it gets converted into equity shares. Company prefers to have this type of allotment since it is less time consuming and less documentation, and so these shares are going to be given because there is less of consumption of time, that is the documentation that takes place is also comparatively less because these shares are going to be offered to a select group of people. There is no question of any sort of advertisement. So that is what we mean by preferential allotment.